provider ACC forms. So if you remember in the setup location, we recommended that you have the ACC 45 numbers set up in there, but there is the option to have them set up in the staff setup. So this is where you would enter the numbers here, and this would be, for example, if a provider is using briefcasing, they would need their own set of ACC 45 numbers. So you would enter them in here in that case. Otherwise, you set it up in the location settings. And having it in the location settings just means that any provider is able to use those numbers when doing a new ACC 45. In the form, it's going to show the number is next, and then it will automatically populate the next number. AITC, RK10 and M45 numbers aren't generally entered in the staff members either. The provider type, now this is very important. It links to what you can actually invoice for. So a GP needs to be set to a general practitioner, and it comes into play with invoicing, for example, CACC, so an ACC consultation, or a nurse consultation, or a GP nurse consult. If you're a rural GP, then you would have this ticked and you would use a different set of codes to invoice with. You'd be using the RP codes. For a nurse to claim ACC, they need to have nurse ticked, and if they're a nurse at a rural practice, they need to have the rural general practice ticked as well. So provider type needs to be entered for invoicing for ACC. Coming up to the logo tab, so just like in the location settings, you've also got a logo tab in the staff member setup. So it has the same functions. You can change the font, bold, underline, and whatever you entered in here will take precedence over the location logo. So if it's looking for a logo and there's one entered in the provider setup, it will overwrite the location logo that's set up. Onto the clinical tab. So this is where you can alter the consultation window for the provider. So I could change subjective to patient complaint, or in this case I'm going to change it to history, so I'll just paste that in there, and then I'll paste subjective into the window over here on the right. To be able to see the changes that I've made, I'll just need to log out of MedTech. And I'll just bring up a patient, so F2 on the keyboard, and I'll search for Duck Taffy. And the patient manager and new consultation window have automatically opened as soon as I put this patient on the pallet, so that's from the staff setup. And here I can see history along the left and subjective showing in the window. So those are the changes that I made in my staff setup. Back into the staff setup now. So there's also the ability to change the font. So if you wanted a certain font for your consultation, you could change that in here as well. So to do this, I would need to right click in the area that I want to change the font. So either in the subjective or objective, I'd need to right click, select font, and choose the font I want. So I would need to do this in both the objective and subjective areas. Coming down to clinical trust relationships. This is where the user can select other service providers to be on their clinical trust list, so giving the selected providers the ability to view clinical records that are marked as confidential. So this is given by placing a tick in the box next to the provider's name. You can also choose the default room here for the provider, so that's utilised within the queue, and that's covered in the A&E webinar, which is already up online, so you can look at that in more detail on there.